This is the front of the book, The Big Orange Splot, and it's written by Daniel Pinkwater. Mr. Plumbeam lived on a street where all the houses were the same. You can see here's a view of his whole street, and every house on the street looks exactly the same. It's a little bit boring, isn't it? He liked it that way. So did everybody else on Mr. Plumbeam's street. This is a neat street, they would say. Then one day, a seagull flew over Mr. Plumbeam's house. He was carrying a can of bright orange paint. No one knows why. Uh-oh. And he dropped the can, no one knows why, right over Mr. Plumbeam's house. Oh, there it is, the big orange spot. It made a big orange splot on Mr. Plumbeam's house. Oh, too bad, everyone said. Mr. Plumbeam will have to paint his house again. I suppose I will, said Mr. Plumbeam. But he didn't paint his house right away. He looked at the big orange splot for a long time. Then he went about his business. The neighbors got tired of seeing that big orange splot. Someone said, Mr. Plumbeam, we wish you'd get around to painting your house. Okay, said Mr. Plumbeam. Because remember, they like a neat street. They want everyone's house to look exactly the same. Oh my, something's different. He got some blue paint and some white paint, and that night he got busy. He painted at night because it was cooler. When the paint was gone, the roof was blue. The walls were white, and the big orange spot was still there. Then he got some more paint. He got red paint, yellow paint, green paint, and purple paint. And look at what his house looks like now. That is very different than all the other people on his street. In the morning, the other people on the street came out of their houses. Their houses were all the same. But Mr. Plumbeam's house was like a rainbow. It was like a jungle. It was like an explosion. Do you think that they're going to like what he did to his house? Here's a close-up view of what it looks like. Wow. There was the big orange splot, and there were little orange splots. There were stripes. There were pictures of elephants and lions and pretty girls and steam shovels. The people said, Plumbeam has popped his cork, flipped his wig, blown his stack, and dropped his stopper. They went away muttering. That night, Mr. Plumbeam bought carpenter's tools, and that night he built a tower on top of his roof, and he painted a clock on the tower. Wow. All those things they said about him, what do you think that means? I think it means they think he's a little bit crazy for doing this to his house. Look what his house looks like now that he built the tower on top. A clock tower. Wow. Looks like. Pretty interesting, but very different than the rest. The next day, the people said, Plumbeam has gushed his mush, lost his marbles, and slipped his hawser. They decided they would pretend not to notice. They are thinking, wow, he's crazy for doing this to his house. That didn't stop him. That very night, Mr. Plumbeam got a truck full of green things. He planted palm trees, baobabs, thorn bushes, onions, and frangipani. And in the morning, he bought a hammock and an alligator. Look at this. He's in the hammock. There he is. He's got his alligator in the front lawn. When the other people came out of their houses, they saw Mr. Plumbeam swinging in a hammock between two palm trees. They saw an alligator lying in the grass, and Mr. Plumbeam was drinking lemonade. There he is with his lemonade. and his gator underneath. Plumbeam has gone too far. This used to be a neat street. Plumbeam, what have you done to your house? The people shouted. My house is me, and I am it. My house is where I like to be, and it looks like all my dreams, Mr. Plumbeam said. The people went away. They asked the man who lived next door to Mr. Plumbeam to go and have a talk with him. Tell him that we liked it here before he changed his house. Tell him that his house has to be the same as ours so we can have a neat street. I don't know if he's going to change his mind or not. He seems to love his new house and the way it looks. Neighbor is going to go over and chat with him about it. There they are. The man went to see Mr. Plumbeam that evening. They sat under the palm trees, drinking lemonade and talking all night long. Early the next morning, the man went out to get lumber and rope and nails and paint. His neighbor went out and bought all those things. When the people came out of their houses, they saw a red and yellow ship next door to the house of Mr. Plumbeam. Look now. So instead of the neighbor talking to Mr. Plumbeam and changing his mind about his home, Mr. Plumbeam talked to his neighbor, and now look what his neighbor did to his house. It doesn't look like Mr. Plumbeam's, it's different. It looks like a ship. I bet that's what this man likes. He likes ships and water. So he made his house look like that. Here's a close-up view of it. There he is, standing on top. What have you done to your house? They shouted at the man. My house is me, and I am it. My house is where I like to be, and it looks like all my dreams, said the man, who had always loved ships. He's just like Plumbeam, the people said. He's got bees in his bonnet, bats in his belfry, and knots in his noodle. Then one by one, they went to see Mr. Plumbeam late at night. They would sit under the palm trees and drink lemonade and talk about their dreams. And whenever anybody visited Mr. Plumbeam's house, the very next day that person would set about changing his own house to fit his dreams. So this is his neighbor's house. Now look what happens when his other neighbors chat with him. They go back and look what they do. They change their homes to make them look like their dreams. So this is the neighbor of the person with the ship house. Look, they made theirs look like a hot air balloon. And this one looks like a palace. Look at the next one. A castle. Wow. Isn't that amazing? The houses definitely don't look the same anymore. And this is what their street looks like now. Very different than the front of the book. In the front, all the houses looked exactly the same, and now each one is different. Whenever a stranger came to the street of Mr. Plumbeam and his neighbors, the stranger would say, "This is not a neat street." Then all the people would say, "Our street is us, and we are it. Our street is where we like to be, and it looks like all of our dreams." The end. What a great story. What do you think the lesson was in that story? I think it was that everybody is different and unique and special, just like these houses. We're not all supposed to be the same. That's what makes us special, and that's a great thing. So I have a fun activity for you if you want to do it. You certainly don't have to, but I think I'm going to do it. I took a piece of paper, and I drew a triangle at the top and a square at the bottom. Looks like a house. But right now, it's kind of a boring house. I think I'm going to decorate my house to look like the house of my dreams. It could look like one of these, or if I have ideas of my own inside my head, I could put them here on my house. And this is what my house would look like if I put it on Mr. Plumbeam's street. When I'm done, I'll show you when we have our Zoom video on Sunday. maybe you could do that too. You could draw a triangle and a square, make a house, and then decorate it how you would want it to be if you lived on Mr. Plumbean's street. That's pretty cool, huh? I hope that you like this story as much as I do. It was called The Big Orange Splot. Have a great day.